Julia had no idea that changing her own Wi-Fi password would lead to the cops knocking on her door at midnight. But there they were. 2 officers, flashlights in hand, standing on her porch like she had just committed a federal crime, and behind them, Karen, her next-door neighbor, arms crossed, face red with fury, grinning like she'd just solved the biggest cyber crime of the century. "Ma'am, we've received a complaint about unauthorized hacking," one officer said, barely suppressing a yawn. "Your neighbor claims you illegally accessed her Wi-Fi and tampered with her internet connection." Julia blinked. Once. Twice. Then she laughed. Hard. This had to be a joke, a really, really bad one, but Karen's face said otherwise. She wasn't laughing. She stood there with the confidence of someone who had caught a master criminal in the act. Her oversized sunglasses still perched on her head, despite the pitch-black night. "Ma'am," Julia said, rubbing her temples, "you're telling me that I hacked your Wi-Fi? The Wi-Fi that I pay for in my own house?" "Yes," Karen snapped. "I don't know how, but you did. My son and I have been using it just fine for months, and then, boom, no internet. And the only thing that changed, you messed with it." Julia's brain short-circuited for a second. She had just heard Karen admit to freeloading off her Wi-Fi. Right in front of the police. The older officer sighed, clearly regretting every decision that led him to this point. "Ma'am, could you explain what happened?" Julia exhaled. "Sure. My internet was running slow, so I checked my router settings. Turned out there were multiple devices connected that weren't mine, so I changed my password. That's it. That's literally all I did." Karen gasped, as if Julia had confessed to arson. "Exactly! You cut off our access without warning. That's illegal!" Julia looked at the officers, expecting them to shut this circus down, but instead they exchanged a look, probably deciding whose turn it was to handle whatever this was. The older one finally turned to Karen. "Ma'am, your neighbor has every right to change her password. It's her internet." Karen's face twisted into something ugly. "No! You don't understand. This is a community. We share things here. And now my son can't even do his homework." Julia nearly choked. "Homework? Your son spends all night screaming into a gaming headset and trash-talking strangers online." Karen gasped again, like Julia had just insulted royalty. "How dare you?" At this point, even the cops looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. The younger officer sighed and gave Julia a tired look. "Ma'am, do you want to press charges?" Julia blinked. "Press charges against her?" "Technically," the officer said, scratching the back of his head, "if she's been using your internet without permission, it could be considered theft." Karen's eyes widened. "What?" Julia took a deep breath, weighing her options. As tempting as it was, "No, I don't want to press charges. I just want to sleep." The officers nodded, clearly relieved. They turned to Karen. "Ma'am, stop using your neighbor's Wi-Fi without permission. If you have an issue, call your service provider. Have a good night." Karen, still sputtering in rage, stormed off, but not before pointing a trembling finger at Julia. "This isn't over." The moment she was gone, Julia shut the door, muttering, "Oh, I know." The next morning, Julia woke up to a new nightmare. It started with her mailbox stuffed with angry, handwritten notes from Karen, each one more dramatic than the last. One read, "Shame on you for destroying community spirit." Another said, "God sees what you did." But the real kicker? A fake petition titled, "Make Julia Give Back the Wi-Fi," with Karen's name signed a dozen times in different handwriting. Then came the neighborhood rumors. At the coffee shop, 2 elderly women whispered behind their cups as she walked by. "That's her," one muttered, "the hacker." At the grocery store, a dad yanked his kid away like she was some kind of criminal. Even the mailman gave her a look of pity. Julia couldn't believe it. Karen had somehow convinced half the neighborhood that she was some evil tech wizard who had locked them all out of the sacred Wi-Fi network. And then things got even stranger. That night, while double-checking her security settings, Julia noticed something weird. A device was still connected to her network, but it wasn't Karen's. She frowned. That was impossible. She'd reset the password twice. There was no way anyone else should still be connected. Her heart started pounding. Someone was inside her network. Curious and a little nervous, she traced the device's activity. Whoever it was, they weren't just using her Wi-Fi. They were doing things, accessing files, logins, transactions. Something shady was happening. And then she saw it. the IP address. The location wasn't from her house. It was coming from Karen's. Julia's stomach dropped. Someone in Karen's house wasn't just stealing Wi-Fi. They were hiding something big. At first, Julia thought it had to be a mistake, but the logs didn't lie. Someone in that house was up to something illegal. She had to know what. So she set a trap. She reopened her Wi-Fi network, but disguised it under a generic name like Free Public Wi-Fi. Then she enabled a tracking program to monitor exactly what was being accessed. It took less than 10 minutes for the mystery device to pop up again. Whoever it was, they weren't just browsing the web. They were accessing bank accounts, cryptocurrency wallets, even private servers. Julia's eyes widened. This wasn't just freeloading, this was hacking. Her stomach twisted. If someone in Karen's house was running illegal operations through her network, it could get traced back to her. She needed proof. So she watched. The device connected again, digging deep into encrypted platforms. Whoever was behind it knew exactly what they were doing. She knew she couldn't handle this alone. She needed to confront Karen, but she had to be careful. Storming over with accusations wouldn't work. Karen would just twist it and play the victim again. So Julia printed out everything, logs, timestamps, a full report of the unknown device's activity. Let her scream this time. Because Julia had evidence. When she knocked, Karen opened the door with a glare. "Oh, look who it is. Come to apologize?" Julia held up the papers. "We need to talk." Karen rolled her eyes. "What now? Did I breathe too loud? Did my lawn offend you?" Julia took a deep breath. "Someone in your house is hacking accounts using my Wi-Fi." Karen blinked, actually looking confused. "What are you talking about?" Julia handed over the papers. "These logs show a device connecting from your house. It's been accessing financial data, personal logins. This isn't just about Wi-Fi anymore, Karen. This is serious." Karen skimmed the pages, frowning. Then she scoffed. "This is ridiculous. I don't even know what half of this means." Julia studied her face. She wasn't lying. She genuinely had no clue. Which meant someone else in her house was behind it. And as if the realization hit both of them at the same time, Karen's expression changed. Her eyes narrowed. She turned sharply toward the stairs. "Daniel!" she yelled. Julia felt a chill run down her spine. Footsteps pounded from upstairs, and a teenage boy appeared at the top of the staircase. Daniel. Around 17, headphones around his neck, clutching a laptop like it was a lifeline. Karen held up the papers. "Explain this." Daniel's face turned pale. I don't know what that is." Karen's nostrils flared. "Julia says someone in this house has been using her Wi-Fi. Something about hacking." Daniel swallowed. "That's stupid. I don't know anything about that." But Julia noticed the way he was holding the laptop, the way his eyes darted toward the door, the nervous energy practically vibrating off of him. Karen narrowed her eyes. "Daniel, give me the laptop." He took a step back. "Mom, no." Her voice sharpened. "Now." Panic flickered across his face. "It's mine. You can't just—" Karen lunged forward, snatching the laptop. Before he could react, she stormed down the stairs, gripping it like a trophy. Julia braced herself as Karen flipped it open. "All right, let's see what's so important that—" She froze. Her face twisted into shock. Daniel took a step back. "Mom, please, I can explain." Karen's eyes snapped up, and for the first time since Julia had known her, she looked genuinely terrified. "Financial data, personal logins. This isn't just about Wi-Fi anymore, Karen. This is serious." Karen skimmed the papers, her brow furrowed in confusion. Then she scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "This is ridiculous. I don't even know what half of this means." Julia studied her face carefully. Karen wasn't lying. She genuinely had no clue what she was looking at. That meant someone else in the house was responsible, and then, like a switch flipped, realization washed over Karen's face. Her expression darkened, eyes narrowing. She turned sharply toward the staircase and shouted, "Daniel!" Julia felt a chill creep up her spine. Heavy footsteps pounded from upstairs. A teenage boy appeared at the top of the stairs, headphones around his neck, gripping a laptop so tightly his knuckles were turning white. Daniel, Karen's son, about 17. Karen held up the papers and barked, "Explain this." Daniel paled. I don't know what that is." Karen's nostrils flared. "Julia says someone in this house has been using her Wi-Fi." She glanced at the logs again. Something about hacking. Daniel swallowed hard. "That's stupid. I don't know anything about that." But Julia wasn't buying it. She noticed the way Daniel was holding his laptop like it was his life support, the way his eyes kept darting toward the front door. He was nervous. Too nervous. Karen narrowed her eyes. "Daniel, give me the laptop." Daniel stepped back. "Mom? No." Karen's voice turned razor sharp. "Now." Panic flickered in Daniel's face. "It's mine, you can't just—" But Karen had already lunged forward and ripped the laptop from his hands before he could react. She stormed down the stairs like she was carrying a ticking bomb. Daniel stood frozen, looking like he might throw up. Julia braced herself as Karen slammed the laptop onto the table and flipped it open. "All right," she muttered. "Let's see what's so important that you—" She stopped mid-sentence, her face twisted into an expression of pure shock. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Daniel took a step back toward the stairs. "Mom, please, I can explain." Karen's eyes shot up, and for the first time since Julia had met her, she looked genuinely terrified. "What is this?" she whispered. Julia leaned over to peek at the screen. There it was, a list of stolen accounts. Streaming services, online banking logins, credit card information, cryptocurrency wallets, all under different usernames. Daniel hadn't just been freeloading, he'd been hacking people's private data. Julia swore under her breath. She knew it was bad, but this was felony-level bad. Karen turned toward her son, her voice shaking. What have you been doing?" Daniel was already backing up, hands raised. It's nothing, okay?" Karen's voice rose to a screech. "You stole people's accounts?" Daniel's panic turned defensive. "It's not like that, it's just streaming accounts. People share those all the time." Julia folded her arms. "Oh yeah? And the banking logins, the crypto wallets, you were stealing money." Karen looked like she was about to faint. Her face went pale and she whispered, "They can trace this back to us." Daniel opened his mouth, then shut it. He knew. He had known the whole time. Karen stood there, frozen, completely speechless for once. Then she dropped the laptop on the table like it was burning her. "Oh my God!" she gasped. Julia sighed. "Yeah, that's what I said." Karen shook her head violently. No. This isn't happening. This is your fault," she suddenly shrieked, spinning to face Julia. "You did something to make this happen. You've been out to get us since the day you moved in." Julia just stared at her. "Are you serious right now?" Karen pointed a trembling finger at Daniel. "Tell me the truth. Tell me Julia hacked your laptop." Daniel's face twisted in disbelief. "Mama, no. That's not— I don't want to hear it." Karen clapped her hands over her ears. "We're fixing this. We're going to make this go away." Julia let out a dry laugh. "Karen, this isn't a parking ticket. Your son has been committing actual cyber crimes." Karen ignored her and started pacing frantically. Then she turned back with a sudden manic smile. "You don't have to tell anyone, right? We can just forget this happened." Julia's eyebrows shot up. "Oh, you're kidding." Karen's voice dropped to a whisper. "I can bake you something. I make great cookies." "I'm allergic to gluten," Julia replied flatly. Karen clenched her fists. "Fine. I'll pay you." Julia exhaled, staring at her in disbelief. "Lady, your son is committing cyber crimes. The police would have found out eventually." Karen's face twisted in fury. "You think you're so smart, don't you?" And then, as if the universe had impeccable comedic timing, a loud knock echoed from the front door. Daniel went completely still. Karen's eyes darted toward the door, her breathing hitched. Julia folded her arms. "Well, that was fast." Karen's body tensed. "You didn't?" Julia just smirked. The knock came again, louder this time, and then a deep voice called out, "This is the FBI. We need to speak with Bradley Smith." Karen gasped. Daniel looked like he was about to collapse. Julia took a sip from her coffee, savoring the silence. Another knock, heavier. The voice returned, anchoring each word deep into the walls of the house. "This is the FBI. We need to speak with Bradley Smith." Karen's eyes snapped between the door and her son, her brain visibly short-circuiting. Then, without warning, she lunged forward and grabbed Daniel by the arm. "Go to your room," she hissed. "Delete everything, now." Daniel yanked his arm away, shaking his head. "Mom, that's not how this works. They already know." Karen spun toward Julia, her voice trembling with desperation. "You did this. You called them." Julia raised an eyebrow. "Your kid's been committing cyber crimes for who knows how long. The only thing I did was stop him from using my Wi-Fi to do it." Karen's face twisted again in pure rage. Before she could say anything else, another voice came from behind the door. "Mrs. Smith, we know you're inside. We suggest you open up. We have a warrant." Julia let out a low whistle. "Oh, warrant. Yeah, that's bad news." Karen let out a high-pitched squeal that was somewhere between a sob and a scream. Her hands shook and her breathing turned shallow. Then, in a move that could only be described as completely unhinged, Karen grabbed the laptop off the table and hurled it at Julia. "Take it, it's yours," she shouted. Julia barely caught it before it hit the floor. She stared at Karen in stunned disbelief. "What? They can't find it here. It's yours now. You planted it." Karen shrieked, waving her arms like a lunatic. Julia exhaled slowly, trying to process just how far gone Karen really was. "Are you seriously trying to frame me right now?" Karen's eyes were wide and wild. "You had access to our Wi-Fi. That means you could have done it. You're the hacker." Julia stared at her. "Karen? You literally just screamed, 'Delete everything,' 5 seconds ago." Daniel groaned and dragged a hand over his face. "Mom, stop, please." But Karen grabbed his shoulders and shook him. "You don't say another word. We deny everything." The knocking turned into pounding. "Last warning. Open the door, or we're coming in." Karen let out a broken breath, turned toward the door, and then did the one thing no one in the room expected. She ran, straight toward the back of the house. Julia blinked. Daniel's jaw dropped. Before anyone could stop her, Karen launched herself through the backyard window. Glass shattered everywhere. A loud thud followed. Then a moan. Julia peeked outside and saw Karen lying on the grass, tangled in her own decorative garden gnome display, groaning in pain. "Oh my God," she muttered. "She actually did it." Daniel slapped a hand to his forehead. "She's lost her mind." Just then the front door burst open. FBI agents stormed in, weapons drawn, voices firm, movements swift and practiced. One agent grabbed the laptop from Julia's hands. Another headed for the shattered window, staring in disbelief at the moaning mess that was Karen. The agent said. "We might need medics for that one." "I'm innocent," Karen cried out from the dirt. An agent rolled his eyes. "Ma'am, you just jumped out of a window." "I panicked," she whined. Julia leaned against the wall, watching the whole scene like a live-action crime show. Daniel had his hands up, eyes glossy, clearly on the verge of tears. One of the agents turned to Julia. "You're the one who reported the unauthorized network activity?" She nodded. "Didn't think it'd escalate this fast." The agent flipped through a small notebook, nodding. "Well, you weren't the only one. We've been tracking multiple fraud cases tied to Daniel's activity. He's been hacking accounts across multiple states." Julia's eyebrows shot up. "Wait, multiple states?" Daniel let out a defeated groan. "Oh, come on." Karen, still lying in the dirt, screamed. "He's just a kid. You can't arrest a child." "He's 18, ma'am. Legally an adult." Karen let out a noise that was equal parts sob and screech. "But he didn't mean to." Daniel sighed. "Mom, stop talking." The agents ignored her and turned back to Julia. "We appreciate your cooperation. This could have gotten a lot worse if it had gone unchecked." Julia shrugged. "I just wanted to change my Wi-Fi password." Could process it. Karen jumped straight through the backyard window. Glass shattered everywhere. A loud thud followed, then a groan. Julia peeked outside and saw her lying in the grass, tangled in her own garden gnome display, moaning in pain. "Oh my God," she muttered. "She actually did it." Daniel slapped a hand to his forehead. "She's lost her mind." Before Julia could respond, the front door burst open. FBI agents swarmed in, guns drawn, movements swift and precise. Within seconds, Daniel had his hands in the air, tears forming in the corners of his eyes. One agent grabbed the laptop from Julia's hands while another moved toward the shattered backyard window, staring in disbelief at the scene outside. "Ah," the agent muttered. "We might need medics for that one." Karen groaned louder. "I'm innocent." One of the agents rolled his eyes. "Mrs. Smith, you just jumped out of a window." "I panicked," she whined from the grass. Julia stood quietly against the wall, watching the chaos unfold like it was a live-action crime show. Daniel was being restrained, the agents were scanning through the laptop, and Karen was still moaning, half buried in her garden gnome pile. Finally, one of the agents turned to Julia. "You're the one who reported the unauthorized network activity?" She nodded. "Didn't expect it to escalate this fast, though." The agent flipped through a small notebook, glancing at the data they had already collected. "Well, you weren't the only one. We've been tracking multiple fraud cases tied to Daniel's activity. The guy's been hacking accounts across multiple states." Julia's eyebrows shot up. "Wait, multiple states?" Daniel let out a miserable groan. "Oh, come on." Karen, still lying in the dirt, suddenly screamed, "He's just a kid. You can't arrest a child." The agent closest to her replied calmly, "He's 18, ma'am, legally an adult." Karen let out a sound that landed somewhere between a sob and a screech. But he didn't mean to." Daniel let out a tired, hollow sigh. "Mom, stop talking." The agents ignored her and turned back to Julia. "We appreciate your cooperation. This could have gotten a lot worse if it had gone unchecked." Julia shrugged. "I just wanted to change my Wi-Fi password." One of the agents chuckled. "Well, you might have saved a lot of people from getting their identities stolen." Meanwhile, Karen was still thrashing around in the dirt, pointing dramatically at Julia. "She's the real hacker. She framed my baby." One of the agents exchanged a look with his partner, then turned toward Karen with an exasperated sigh. "Ma'am, we already have months' worth of evidence linked to your son's accounts. We've been investigating this for weeks." Karen's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. Finally, she just slumped back in the grass. "This is so unfair." Daniel let out a long, deep sigh. "Can I just go to jail now?" The FBI agents wrapped up quickly. They secured Daniel's laptop, placed him in handcuffs, and began leading him toward the front door. Karen, now fully grasping that this was actually happening, scrambled to her feet and limped after them. Wait, I'll get a lawyer. Oh." The front door slammed shut behind them. Silence. Julia exhaled and looked around the house. Shards of glass from the broken window sparkled on the floor. Karen's pile of angry complaint letters still sat untouched on the counter. And for the first time in weeks, the house next door was quiet. She closed her own front door and locked it behind her. Then she walked to the living room, sat down on her couch, and opened her laptop. She connected to her Wi-Fi. No alerts, no unknown devices, no Karen, no Daniel, just peace. The next morning, the neighborhood was buzzing with the news. Karen's house was quiet. Daniel was facing multiple felony charges, and Karen, she had been spotted loading a moving truck with that same furious scowl she always wore when yelling across the street. By noon, she was gone. Later that afternoon, while Julia was watering her plants in the front yard, one of her other neighbors, an elderly man named Brian, walked by. He gave her a knowing nod and a small smile. "So," he said, "I heard Karen had to move out?" Julia smirked. "Yep," Brian chuckled. "Guess that means you won." Julia looked around at the quiet, calm neighborhood. The breeze was crisp. The air finally felt light again. For the first time since she moved in, there wasn't a single complaint taped to her door or a false accusation in her mailbox. She took a deep breath, exhaled slowly, and smiled. "Oh," she said, "I definitely won." In today's world, digital boundaries are just as important as physical ones. Julia thought she was simply protecting her internet connection by changing her Wi-Fi password. What followed? A midnight visit from the police, public shaming by her neighbor Karen, and the shocking discovery that someone in Karen's house was running a cybercrime operation through Julia's network. This story isn't just entertaining. It's a reminder for all of us. Protect your digital space. Monitor your devices. Don't ignore strange connections. Your Wi-Fi isn't community property, and anyone telling you otherwise might be hiding more than freeloading. We also learn how crucial it is to stay calm, gather evidence, and let the facts speak. Julia didn't lose her cool. She handled a ridiculous situation with clarity, exposed the truth, and in the end, justice showed up, in the form of the FBI. So what's the real lesson? Know your rights, protect your data, and don't let anyone guilt-trip you for setting boundaries. If you love stories where karma hits hard and justice wins, don't forget to follow and subscribe to HOA Revenge, where everyday battles meet epic endings. Your next favorite story is just one click away.